Okay, hello everybody. So we're gonna be making a start today, and then as I said, so there's always people joining in the go. So we make a start, and then we can talk about the topic of today. So officially, should I say good afternoon, everybody, or good morning? So I very much doubt there's people that are behind from the US today. So I was expecting they would join. That's not the case at the moment. So the attendance is relatively low, but it's still good for us to go. So we have in attendance somebody from the a developer. I also have an investor, and I also have a solar energy, I would say, enthusiast. And it's good for us to have a very good discussion. So today it's the fourth. One second, please. Yeah, today is the fourth call of the WIBA sessions, and just to recap a little bit, what is WIBA? What is best for Africa? So, what is best for Africa? It's simply an initiative which is looking at the opportunity and also the challenges that the continent face regarding two main industries. So, renewable energy on one side, and also African technology. So that's what or we call it here, the WIBA. And let me just move very quickly to what's going to be the topic of today. But before that, we have some house rules to make sure that the call runs smoothly. So first of all, you would have noticed your camera have been turned off, your microphone as well. So it's on purpose, just to make sure that there is no disturbance. If you have any question, I will encourage you to please ask them using the chat, and we will address them at the end of the session at the Q&A. Obviously, if you have any feedback, feel free to send us your feedback at sources@renewableinafrica.com. And last but not the least, I'm very much hoping that you're going to be enjoying yourself, you're going to be learning as well, and then you're going to be telling us what we can do to make it better. Okay, so the content of today, so very briefly talking about what is renewables in Africa, a quick reminder of what a trade deal is. I suspect all of you know by now, a history about the Africa-US trade relations, and also looking at the pre-AGOA, which is the main program that is running the relationship between those two blocks, and the AGOA per se, Power Africa, talking about that as well. Looking at the new U.S. policy to understand whether there has been any change since the new president has arrived, and also we're going to be concluding. So, what is renewable in Africa? I suspect all of you by now know what renewables in Africa is, but it's still good for me to refresh your minds. It's a clean energy engineering consultancy. What we provide is technical advice to developers and also power consumers. So we've done in the past project in Cameroon, in Botswana, and we're currently exploring project potentially in Zambia and Zimbabwe. We've done a number of market research and business intelligence reports for our client investors. And as you might not know, we run a survey with Grant Thornton that was during the summer, and we're currently compiling the report, which is almost finished now. And we're also doing brokerage and route market. That's for clean energy companies that are interested to move into the African market. Now, we also a media platform, and most of you will know us from this site. And what we do is promoting and raising awareness about the renewables energy sector to businesses and also to the general public. So that's who we are, very quickly. So now, talking about trade deal. So what is a trade deal? Very simply, it's a commercial agreement between countries, and the commercial agreement will actually, I would say, manage the trade relationship. And it could be bilateral, that's when you talk about two countries, or multilateral. So, and the US, for example, was recently in the news because they have agreed and signed a new NAFTA agreement. That is the trade deal connecting the three countries, the US, Mexico, and Canada. So you may have heard of it. So why are we actually bothering about talking about USA? So for the simple reason that If we're looking at our single countries, so the US is now the second biggest trade partner for Africa. So they used to be the first, but towards the start of the decade, so they've been overtaken by China. And you can see here, for example, a stats. The trade volume in 2017 was roughly about 39 billion, and 60% of that was actually export coming from sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm sure you have seen on the picture there, on the graph there, that the trade volume is actually 53, but this is actually for the whole of the continent, whereby the 39 is looking at the sub-Saharan Africa. So we also want to understand where does clean energy sit, because it's very important for us to see that. Okay, let's look at the history of US and Africa trade relations. All started in 1958, right, I would say at the turn or during the independence, and President Eisenhower at the time created an Africa Bureau, which was simply looking at all the matters related to Africa, and it was quite wide. We're looking at economy, policies. We're looking as well at consular affairs and whatever. So, and after that, in 1961, the president at the time, John Kennedy, created the USAID. Was mainly looking at the foreign aid and development for the US. And obviously, one of the main geography that they were targeting at the time was the African continent. So fast forward, in 1976, this is where we really see the actual first system put in place to address the relationship between the US and the African continent. That was actually with the Generalized Preferential System, GPS, which was looking at establishing some duty-free access for some of the products. So we're gonna look at that a bit more into detail in the next slide or so. And from 2000, this is the era of AGOA, which stands for African Growth and Opportunity Act. And the AGOA was actually installed in 2000, and it has been extended twice since then. So first, in 2004 by President Bush II, I'm not the first president, and then in 2015, recently by President Barack Obama. And you will see in 2013, obviously, we're going to be talking about Power Africa and what it means for the continent and the sector. So pre-AGOA. So before that, as I sort of alluded to, so we were in the GPS system, and it was actually installed in 1976, and was looking at establishing some free duty export for product, about 5,000 products, 400, 800 precisely. But those were mainly products coming from agriculture, textiles, apparel, travel, and whatever. That's only for 129 countries. Well, at least not necessarily the right word here. I would say those were countries not only from the African continent, but also from other continents. The program expired initially in 2013, and then in 2015 it was extended for another 13 months. That was for President Barack Obama. But what we can notice here, so as I say, it was mainly looking at agriculture, textile, and apparel, travel, but there was nothing whatsoever looking at clean energy. So it was virtually non-existent. So the AGOA per se. So what is the African Growth and Opportunity Act? So it was enacted in 2000 by President Bill Clinton. So I don't know if I mentioned that, but he's the one who did that. So it was extended in 2004 and 2015 later. And obviously what the program was doing was actually extending the line of product that was benefiting from the preferential duty-free arrangement that the country has done. And the objective of the project was actually to enhance the market between the US and sub-Saharan Africa, and also give opportunity related to Southern Africa to be able to export market to a more mature market. And that was actually alongside the other initiative that other bloc like the EU or China has done in the past. And obviously the idea was also to boost very much the trade. So you can see here a couple of pictures. One, so if you look on the right hand side, on the top here, so this is President Bush signing the extension of the AGOA 2004, and below you have President Obama doing the same, but for 2015. So to be eligible for AGOA, so country had to meet 5 requirements per se. So somebody would say, some other people would say 6 or 7. It all depends how you group all those requirements. First of all, you had to develop a market-based economy. So that was obviously very much important for the American, and make sure that you have in place rules that will not be detrimental to the American economies. So you had to respect the rule of law. So that's obviously having a democratic society, or at least installing a government that respect the democratic rules. It was very much important. You had to put in place initiative to reduce poverty. So because the idea was also to lift up the continent. That obviously, like I said, that's the American perspective. And you were looking at the labor and human rights, which was also very much important. And finally, the international security aspect that was looked at. And I have to say, those rules were established because back in the days, there was, I would say, a number of areas that were going through some instability. So in the continent. So coming to 2000, obviously the country was changing, and as a result, so we had a number of opportunity coming up. So when we look on the left-hand side, you can see all the different countries colored in dark blue that are eligible to participate in the AGOA program. So the ones that are not colored dark blue obviously cannot participate, and those are for various reasons. Either they're not eligible because they're not meeting the requirement that I have listed there on the right, or they have been suspended. And this is, for example, the case for Zimbabwe and RDC in Eritrea, which were obviously excluded by the U.S. government. So looking at the trade, because the whole idea of the AGOA was to boost up the trade between the U.S. and also Africa. So we can see that it kind of has achieved that, because if we're looking at that graph, looking at, for example, the yellow curve, you can see that between 2002 and 2000, roughly 8 approximately, we have the import, basically the export from sub-Saharan Africa that has been boosted from roughly 20 billion to what, more than 80 billion, so fourfold, which is actually quite significant. Obviously, you see a dip just after 2008. I'm sure you guess what it is. That's the financial crisis. Picked up again, and then it dipped. So the second dip that you see, that you are seeing here, this is also first of all linked to commodity prices that were dropping, and also as we will see from the American export, that's the competition with other blocs. So we can see the green line, which is actually looking at the non-oil exports, and it's relatively low compared to the other. Why? Simply because most of the exports were actually commodity, or that was petroleum products. So that was more than 64%. But the AGOA was actually meant to boost up this level of trade as well, which, as you can see, has had some mitigated results. So that's what we can see. So now, looking at the top export market for the US, so we have in order of hierarchy, so South Africa, 5 billion, Nigeria 2, then you have Ghana, Ethiopia, and Angola. So that's where the US is mainly exporting their product. And then for the African country that are exporting to the US for import for Americans, so the usual suspect for the first two. So we have South Africa and Nigeria. And Nigeria, what is quite striking here in terms of the export, they are very close to South Africa compared to the export for the US. And then you have Angola, Cote d'Ivoire, and Botswana. All of them, at the exception maybe of South Africa, all of them are economies that are pretty much dominated by commodities, right? So that's one thing we need to know. So now, AGOA was also looking at a number of areas, and the focus for us as well here, especially being professional from the clean energy industry, is to understand what and how the AGOA system or program has boosted the clean energy, or has it done it at all? So within the toolbox of AGOA, there are three program or three initiative tool that you want to list up there. So first of all, we have the USAID, which is all about US foreign aid and development. So it's one of the, let's say, wealthiest agencies, foreign aid agencies in the world, with a budget of about 27 billion. That was back in 2017. And if we are looking at some figures for 2015, we can see that 8 billion were actually managed by the Bureau for Africa. So I'm not saying that all of that money was flowing to clean energy, but you knew that some of it will be going there, and you will understand why in a couple of slides. And also they launched initiative like sorry, that's not Power for All, that's Power for Africa. Sorry. Apologies here. So Power for Africa, so that was a program launched by President Barack Obama. That was an initiative that was linking up a number of agencies in the US that was already addressing issues in Africa. So they brought all of that into one banner and called it the Power Africa. So we're going to be looking at that in the next slide in a bit more detail. And we have also the Clean Energy Ministerial Initiative. So this is pretty much a global initiative which was launched by the Secretary for Energy of the Obama administration. I think it was Stephen Chu, if I remember correctly. So the CEM is nothing but a global forum where you have energy ministers that are meeting all together. As far as I know, that's the only one that's happening at the moment in the globe. And there are two things that they are doing. So they're having high-level discussion to look at policies that can boost up the transition towards clean energy. And they take on an annual level basis initiative that will address the sector. And part of it, obviously, is looking at how they can potentially support developing worlds to catch up. Because one thing that has been observed before is that in terms of geographies that was struggling with the impact and the consequences of climate change. So Africa was at the prime seat, but most of the investment going to clean energy wasn't focused on Africa before. So that's the reason for the creation of this forum. So now, if we're looking at Power Africa in detail, what is Power Africa? As I say, it's an initiative which is linking up a number of different agencies in the US together to address the issue of electrification of Africa. So the way the model works is linking up the private sector with government bodies, and also adding to that experts from the field, energy and finance, to talk together and come together with solutions. So there are two goals mainly, which is to add about 30 gigawatts of clean energy generation and create 60 million new connections, which is also was very important. So at their disposal, they had a number of tools that they can use. So it was technical assistance, providing grants as well. So supporting transaction for project that was ongoing, providing loan guarantee, advice in terms of policy. And I think there's more too. I just didn't want to list all of them, but I would encourage you, when you can, to have a closer look at that. And the record to date, I would say it's quite honorable record to date. So they have supported, remember, the program was launched in 2013. So 4 years later, so there was about 84 projects, power projects that were supported, which is, as I'll say, not negligible. So they had about 7 gigawatts of power generation that was committed, and and within that, I think I had, no, sorry, that's 2,000 megawatts, sorry, that's not 2 megawatts, 2,000 megawatt operational. And those projects, if we're looking at the value, that's worth about 14 billion. 75% of those projects were from the renewable energy sector, and they created about 10 million of new connections. So, but the program is still running, and so far, I would say it has delivered honorable results for the continent. So, with regard now to the new policy, because we know that there's now no president at the helm of the American government. So the question was, and looking at obviously at some of the optics. So the question we were asking was pretty much whether the policy was going to be changed, because there was a lot of talk about America first. Would it mean that America wouldn't be looking at other part of the world, and especially Africa? So that was one of the big questions at the time Donald Trump was taking charge of the country. So what has been observed, though, is so far, and also with the confirmation of Foreign Secretary of Commerce, so there has been a continuation mainly of Obama policies, which is the support for the AGOA program. So they were talking about sort of initially during the campaign, focusing more into bilateral agreements. So as far as we are aware, there is no such things for Africa at the moment. So the UN already has 6 bilateral agreements with countries in Africa, but that was obviously pre-Donald Trump. But visibly, they're not looking to add any more at the moment. So obviously, they are very strong support of the trade facilitation agreement. So if you can say one thing about that, the reason they are supporting the trade facilitation agreement is simply because the cost of doing business in Africa is actually quite huge. And the idea is to encourage more African governments to follow WTO rules to make sure that they can drop barrier for trade. Obviously, there was a big fight with China. That's in the news every day. So the idea is to look at how they can contain the advancement of China or in Africa. They already lost the first seat. So they're looking at how they can contain and potentially take back their seat. And the Advisory Council on Africa was created again by President Barack Obama, and it looks like it's here to stay. So I did mention previously in another slide that the US was a big investor. So there was about 8 billion that was going for the Bureau for Africa. So if we, and obviously a number of those investments will be going to into energy. If you could look at obviously the chart there. So on my left, on the left hand side, you can see energy. It's more than, well, definitely more than 50%. It's more around about 65%. So a big part of that investment is going to energy. Not all to renewables energy, but there will be a number of it. Why? Simply because a number of new energy projects happening in Africa are targeted towards clean energy. So that's why we can assume that those investments will also be flowing into the sector. Now, in conclusion, what could we say roughly? It's definitely what is quite sure. It's before AGOA, there was very little engagement between the US and Africa, simply bilateral relationship that was mainly looking at managing the Africa affairs, but no real program addressing the issues of the continent or the relationship with the continent. So AGOA is now seen as the cornerstone for that relationship, and it's still valid all the way until 2025. So the clean energy policies that are included within the AGOA program are still coming from the Obama era. So as far as we're concerned, the Trump administration has not brought anything new, as far as we know. Yeah, and then that's what I'm saying here on the third point, at least for now, because who knows whether he's going to have a second term and whether he's gonna want to either, I would say, sort of cancel some of these policies, because we've seen that for other part of the policy whereby he was looking to erase some of the Obama, I would say, achievements. So we just don't know. But for the moment, it's a continuation of the policy. And then the AGOA is running all the way until 2025, and the negotiation looking at the agreement after that have already started, and it's looking at protecting the competitiveness of the US compared to other blocs like EU, China, or India. So the reason I'm saying that, so for those of you who attended the previous call, I talked about the economic partnership agreement that the EU is developing with Africa. Is all about having reciprocal arrangement whereby African countries that abide to the rules will have full access to the European market, and also vice versa for Europe. So at the moment, the AGOA, it's simply a non-reciprocal arrangement. So African countries that qualify have access to the American market, but when I say have access, I would say duty-free access to American market, but the same is not true for Americans. So, but what they're saying now is, if other blocs like the EU or China are now having preferential treatment in terms of duty arrangement, so that might actually become detrimental to the companies. So they want to address that and see how they can potentially change it. Another issue, obviously, is to look at how they can contain the advancement of China. Other blocs might also be a concern later, but at the moment, their focus is purely on how do we make sure that we keep on top of China and manage their progress. Okay, so and last but not the least, though, the African continent since this year has been starting a negotiation of a very ambitious free trade agreement that will connect the 55 countries. And at the moment, the agreement has not been ratified yet. I think it's been pre-agreed by roughly 40 countries. And then should this trade area come to life, that will be most likely one of the biggest, if not the biggest, trade area in the world. And that, for me, will be perceived as a game changer. And all the bloc, the EU and the American, are very interested in those negotiations to see whether they can come to fruition, because it means that in terms of tariff barrier and also ease to do business in Africa, there will be a lot of benefit and advantage that could be extracted from this arrangement. And that's what we can say for today. So what's on for RIA? Very simply, I talked about the survey with Grant Thornton that will be available soon. Energy Job Line, we are in partnership with them, working on some project in East Africa, in the Philippines, and more. And it was a pleasure for me talking to you about the relationship between the US and Africa. And I'm very much open now to your question. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think there's a number of questions. So just to remind you how it works. So we're going to be, Because I can see I have received a number of, wow, okay. There's a few questions already here. So let me just first of all go through that one by one. So, okay, this is one question. So, is AGOA free trade for export into the US from SSA? And the answer is yes. So, AGOA is a free trade export to the US, but for this country from Sub-Saharan Africa to qualify, they will need to make sure that they can meet the requirement that were established by the U.S. government. So we can go back to these requirements. So I think it was towards the start. Yes, those are the 5 requirements: to market-based economy, rule of law, poverty reduction, labor, and human rights. So this is very important to meet. Okay, so I'm hoping I'm responding to your question, Alex. So if not, feel free to ask another one. So let me just carry on for now. Okay. Do you have any insight into how much the US TidyZ, for example, Power Africa, does it stipulate use of US supplier, service provider? Okay. At this point in time, I would say I'm not 100% sure whether they would tie into the US supplier. I would be tempted to say that they clearly, like any countries that's looking after the interests of their own company, they will appreciate if obviously project developers or countries will use the services of American company. But as far as I know, I don't think it's. I'm not aware of it being a mandatory requirement. And the reason I'm saying that is because Power Africa is actually collaborating with a number of other agencies. For example, we collaborate with DFID, and we collaborate as well with GIZ. And then if you're talking about collaboration with those other two agencies, you can expect that they will want to make sure as well that the money or the opportunity are also open to their company. So that's what I would say. So I'm not aware of requirement be only tied to American companies. So this is the thing. Okay, I have another question here. Okay. Can US be considered a good trade partner for Africa with regard to clean energy? Okay, it's a difficult question to respond to. I was to be honest. I would say partly yes because the Power Africa program has already, as we can see, delivered some results for the continent, and then it's one of the main programs that are driving the sector now in Africa. Simply as well because with the size of the U.S. investment and also the size of the U.S. capabilities. So when they get involved into a program, usually they will bring with them a number of other trade partners that will want to be involved. I mentioned, for example, DFID, GIZ, they are other partners. So that's actually the strength of the US. So from that perspective, I would say, yes, it's a good trade partner, or this is beneficial to because they are providing as well a number of help in terms of policy development for these countries. And because it's happening, that means that it creates a climate of confidence for investors that want to step into the continent. Now, the reason I would be maybe slightly a little bit more reserved. That's more for now. It's simply because, well, we've seen that by now. So we just don't know what's going to happen with the new administration. So it's still, I think, president, that's half term is done almost now. So he might potentially go for another term. So should it happen, what will happen to the program? Would the program continue? I don't know. So there's not great certainty at the moment. Although they have continued so far with the Obama policies, as I'll say, we've seen from other agreements what has happened to them. So I will be slightly cautious, I would say. So, but for the moment, looking at the record, I would say yes, the program has delivered. Sure, they can more can be done, but it's it's not negligible, and it's clearly one of the main program driving the industry in Africa at the moment. Oh, okay, good question here. So the question is AGOA reciprocal. I say that very quickly, so maybe I didn't insist on that enough. AGOA is not reciprocal at the moment. It means that AGOA, for countries that are eligible, it opens up the American market to them, and now they can. That in theory, obviously, because in practice, what we have seen, and that's the reason why the trade, the export from Africa have been dropping a little bit. So you still have to meet the standards to be able to trade in the US, and you also have to meet the you have to be competitive because the US is a big market, so there's a lot of players, and usually for you to be competitive, you need to be able to use economy of scale, both for manufacturing and also for trading. And then we know it's not the strength of African country at the moment. Sorry. Okay, so another question is, okay, how to negotiate with the US in position of strength. Okay, it's not an easy task because the US is the most powerful country in the world, at least at the moment for now. And then Africa is relying a lot on foreign aid from not only from the US, but from all the other developed countries. So it's always difficult to be in this sort of negotiation where you know that you will sit at the table of your donor, put it that way. So the best way for me is to make sure that African country can always negotiate in black. So there's no point for you to having just one-on-one negotiation with the US. I think you're just not going to be strong enough, even the likes of South Africa and Nigeria. So having black negotiation, I believe, is better because it's emerging economy, and we have about 7, top performing economies in the world now in sub-Saharan Africa. So, and like the other bloc, so the US want to make sure that they can maintain their position into the continent. So I would say African countries have to use that at the advantage, basically, to make sure that first of all they can stay united and they can play the competition. And we have seen that. So if you just excuse me for a second, I'm just gonna show you a graph. So if I can go back to the one looking at the what did I mean that? That's the one. That's the one. So one of the reasons we have seen a drop, because if you look, for example, at the US export dropping for 2014, one of the reasons as well, it's because you simply have more competition. So you have other big bloc coming up to the continent. You have the likes of China, you have the like of India, have become more and more powerful economies, or certainly economies that are competitive for Africans. And you also have the likes of the EU. So the US is losing a little bit market share. So they want to make sure that they can limit that. So basically, playing the competition can allow African countries to be able to negotiate, or to at least be in a better position that they would have been if they only do bilateral negotiation. So that's what I would say. Okay. Okay, another question here is which country has Power Africa and which country has AGOA? Okay. It's another good question. So you can see on the map here, the country color in dark blue, that's where you have the AGOA. So unfortunately, I don't have the map for Power Africa with me, but it's almost mirror the AGOA map, for the simple reason that the AGOA already set the framework of the relationship between US and Africa, and obviously looking at ways to improve the relationship between the US and the African continent. So it's then easier for them to roll out the Power Africa program in within the same map, or the same country where they've already negotiated the AGOA. So what I wanna say though here is, I'm not saying that all the countries that are eligible for AGOA are automatically also part of Power Africa now, because a country like Botswana, for example, as far as I know, it's not yet part of Power Africa. So, and I'm sure there are some others. What I'm just saying is most of the country that are connected to the Power Africa initiative are also obviously connected with the AGOA program, because there are already some existing relationship, and it's easier to build up from there. So that's what I'm saying. Oh, okay. Quick questions. I'm just taking. Okay. So the question is, what's happening after AGOA? I've alluded to that a little bit. AGOA, it's ending in 2025, and negotiation, that means we have another 7 years, or less than 7 years precisely. So there are currently some discussion that already have started, and the idea is to make sure that the US can compete at a level playing field with the other powers, so the EU, China, and India. As I say, so there are preferential arrangement between these countries, this country and Africa. And at the moment, the US don't have the same arrangement, for the simple reason that at the time AGOA was negotiated, so the continent was in a very much different position. So it was a case of putting in place some program to support these economy to join, let's say, like people say, the Council of Nations, so trading with the rest of the world. So it was very much a one-sided approach. So basically, countries from developing world trading into a mature market. And as we know, obviously, the trade volume compared to other blocks, I mean, for example, the trade between the EU and the US, so the Africa trade was almost insignificant. So it was about raising that level. So that's what the program was at the time when it was conceived in 2000. So now, fast forward, we are on 2018. So that's 18 years down the line. It's going all the way to 2025. So Africa is a very much different place right now. So there's a number of very well performing countries and becoming very attractive for a number of people. So you see that with negotiation happening with Africa and the other countries. So now the US, if they're not careful, can be at a disadvantage. So I believe that they will want to extend the program, maybe under a different format slightly. They will probably want to address the imbalances with regard to the benefit that the US can extract from the agreement. But I believe there will still be some engagement. I think it will be just silly for the US to retract. And then yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, African countries should be aware of that and make sure that they use the attractivity, to make sure that they can negotiate also, I would say, good agreements for them. I can, for example, talk about one issue that we observed recently, which was there was a trade dispute between the US and some country from East Africa that was regarding textile. I know it's not clean energy, but I'm just sharing very quick information. And the dispute was about the ban that was countries from that side of the continent, East Africa, were looking to impose into some US supplier, or not just US supplier, that was actually some supplier coming from the developed world, because this supplier were actually shipping secondhand clothing into this market, East Africa, threatening the local economy. So the ban was about protecting the local economy, and then I believe the US have also obviously not appreciated this this approach, and they have the American Congress has threatened, for example, I know Rwanda to take him out of AGOA because of this particular issue. So that's the kind of issue that needs to be looked at, because trade agreement, yes, it's good to be doing trade, but it's about, well, how do you protect local economies? And African economy, I would say, they're still fledgling compared to much more mature bloc. So it's understandable that they will want to protect some section of the economy. And for me as well, it's about, because solar power, for example, has become very, very attractive into the market. So it will be good for African countries to make sure that they can use this agreement to now bring the investment they need, not only to build those solar plant or wind farm or whatever, but actually to develop locally manufacturing and also develop the skills. This is really how you're going to drive down the cost, not simply building and going. So that doesn't change anything. It just means that the continent will stay a market and will not become a player. So I believe this aspect as well, because energy, it's a central part of the development of the continent. So it should have, like I say, an important position into those negotiations. And I'm very much hoping that's what will happen. Okay, so I think that's it for today. So thank you very much for joining the call today. And you're going to be receiving the recordings and also the presentation soon. But very quickly, let me run a poll. Yes, launching now. So if you can complete that for me, that's just collecting the feedback. And after that, we can call it a day. Okay. Okay. So, okay. So that's great. So that's what I wanted. So thank you very much. And then I wish you a wonderful end of your day. Bye.